Hello everyone, it's your favorite night owl here with a little old video on hurricane preparedness. This video is filled with my personal opinions and is not sponsored by any brand names that may or may not be viewed or mentioned within this video. Now that that's out of the way, let's get on with it, shall we? As previously stated, this is based on publicly available information and my lived experiences in an area that does receive periodic visits from hurricanes. This is a hurricane zone. Alrighty then. Now, there are factors to take into account that, generally speaking, a lot of people won't when thinking about hurricane preparedness that are really important to do so. And first of all, it's regularity and geography. How often does a hurricane come through your area every year? Is it a yearly thing, or is it once every other year, but mostly tropical storms? And, well, there's other factors at play there. There's also geography. Are you personally sitting in a flood zone, or is the area around you a flood zone, leaving you potentially getting cut off, even though you are technically upon the high ground? This, of course, can be mitigated to a degree, depending on how bad the scenario is in that particular circumstance, as there is areas around here that do put their houses off the ground, and even if you, due to the flooding conditions in my area, there are some places where your house could be 20 feet off the ground and still get flooded. And that is just comes down to the geography of where your home happens to sit. And my particular case is I'm on the high ground, so it's mostly all the areas around me that get flooded, and I get kind of stuck here for a couple weeks afterwards without power generally. Although there are individuals who get it much worse, like individuals who live in areas where the flooding gets so bad the only way in and out of where they are in a hurricane is through a small boat. And that is not inherently uncommon in some of the areas around here. Something that can be used to kind of gauge things is whenever there's a bad thunderstorm in your area, does it knock out the power? Approximately how long does it take to get it fixed, especially if the thunderstorm's over a couple days? And if so, does your particular property flood, and how bad? And does the area around you flood or get to just on the cusp of flooding? This is, of course, some factors to take into account. Now, there are, of course, the things that can also help mitigate factors. There are usually various programs available online and through government sources, high quality local programs and all kinds of stuff to help hurricane proof your house. And just kind of look into that. There might be something in your Pacific area. And there's usually some sort of, like I said, some sort of government, at least in my personal experiences, or state affiliated, not necessarily the state itself, guidelines or information on preparing for hurricane-related emergencies. So, moving on from there, if there's, resources in your area, take advantage of them. And a way to mitigate geography is, well, if you live near a quarry, well, you eventually get a good deal on stone. And there's also things like sandbags, and generally speaking on Craigslist, people will be giving away free piles of dirt. And that periodically comes up. So those can be used to help essentially build a dam around your house. And a berm, a dam, and depending on how bad the flooding scenario is, it may not work in many circumstances. So it's just something to take into account. Then once you modify, because you could also have your house raised on stilts like previously mentioned, potentially get your land raised, what was level or low ground could be made high, as long as it's not cost prohibitive. Alrighty then. So there is those particular, you modify geography, there's usually publicly available information, and then there's things like food and water to take into account, and power specifically, because power determines if you have access to cold storage or not. You can get, solar panels, and there's ways to protect them in the case of minor hurricanes, and that's fairly abundant information as well. So once you have that, there's also wind, as long as your wind turbine doesn't get damaged. Generators, well, then you need to keep some fuel on hand. Fuel does go bad after a while, so you have to, if it's possible, which is not always the case, get it before the storm. General recommendation there, just before. And that, without that cold storage, the options available for food goes down. Now there's a wide variety of options there. There's freeze-dried goods, which would require you to boil water, which they have camping stoves, wood-burning stoves. You got to keep a stockpile of wood in that case. Depending on how long you might, propane grill might be usable. If it's only on average like a few days before power is restored. And that's one thing to take into account, is how long does it usually take to get the power restored. As previously mentioned, you have the wood, you got to stockpile the wood, charcoal, you got to stockpile the charcoal. Get yourself a nice little old Dutch oven like I have and know how to cook with, and make nice big pots that you can share with not only your family and the neighbors, depending on the size of the Dutch oven in question. This is moving on. This goes into, well, of course, the dried goods. There's canned goods, and once you can get things like soups and stews that help change up the diet. And there's things you can make yourself. I personally make, for a hurricane, a bunch and put them in some cold storage. And some, if you have available, a cold cellar will do. And I personally make a high-calorie chocolate bar, and the process I use to make said high-calorie chocolate bar also makes it resistant to heat, so instead of just melting in your hands, it becomes basically the consistency of a nice soft fudge. And almost brownie-like fudge, like a fudge-like brownie at times. It depends on the specific recipe I'm using. Now, there's also, I make my own hard bread, which is leavened hard bread, which is flavored. I make salt and vinegar and chocolate, and also an herb one. These are all options relatively available that some of them would require access to heat to boil water. And water is very important as well. Do you have a way like a solar still to distill water? Good water filters that don't require power. Maybe they need batteries, so you stockpile on batteries. Those are all possible options for you. And they make outdoor water filters for camping and other stuff along those lines. And solar stills can be made, or, I think I've seen some for sale, but that's a hard I think, so you might want to check in on that. And they be made really easily as well. You can stockpile bottles of water as well. And water is very important. There's also medication. If you need medication, you may need, if it's possible for what you're taking, stock up, and if it can be needs to be stored cold or not. And cold storage for medication is very important. You got a cold cellar, maybe that's a way to circumvent, but you really need to consider power. And you can also use the ice packing method. Make sure you have plenty of ice, and that'll last generally a few days. And okay, So everything kind of ties into one another, and there's usually a lot of publicly available information. You can modify your geography to an extent. You have concerns about food, and there's a wide variety of options for that. There's also protection. You got to think about protection. And there comes a point you have to decide between feeding your family, making sure they have food and water, and personally, I do not fault either party in that regard. I do not fault the individual desperate enough to take action, and I do not fault the person defending their access to that water and food for their family. To me, neither of them are truly in the wrong. So there's that, and you have to consider your options. Big Rock, of course, is an option. You know, it's one of the most classic options. Might be the only thing legal in your area. Maybe then you might even get in trouble. You know, military-grade rocks. You know, I don't know the regulations on that, but, you know, those laws are probably coming at some point. Thank you for your time, and, yeah, you might want to get yourself a nice boomstick if you find it morally and legally applicable. Like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment, positive or negative. I do appreciate. There will be more topic videos, hopefully better quality than this, and IRL videos are coming. Like I said, thank you for your time. Like, share, and subscribe. See everyone around. Toodles!